I wonder what kind of adult this child will become. Today, my grandson Michael injured a younger grade student, Alex. But Michael doesn't seem to show any remorse. He acts on his emotions and doesn't know how to control his anger. At this rate, he might do something truly irreversible. That night, in the quiet bedroom, where only the sound of the air purifier could be heard, I looked down at Michael. I could hear his faint breathing. I stared at Michael, sleeping with a peaceful, innocent, and adorable expression. Suddenly, the coldness of the knife in my right hand made my heart freeze. As I gazed at the sharp blade, the thought of wanting to free Michael from his suffering ran through my mind. I clenched my teeth and tightly gripped the wrist, holding the knife with my other hand. A mix of affection, hatred, sadness, and many other emotions swirled within me. I no longer knew what I wanted to do. Suppressing my trembling body and erratic breathing, I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, I can't take it anymore. I raised the knife I held with both hands over Michael. This is the only way. I have no other choice. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My name is Sharon Stone. Now, I live with just my husband, Frank. Frank is close to retirement, so he always finishes work on time. We enjoy quiet dinners together at home and take walks on weekends. We are both healthy, the mortgage is paid off, and our children are independent. I never doubted that our retirement would be fulfilling and meaningful. Our daughter, Kathy, works in the fashion industry and frequently travels to Europe for business. Kathy apparently decided at a young age that she wouldn't get married. The reason is not particularly about bravado. I deeply respect my daughter for living her life with pride in her work. On the other hand, our son, David, got married at 28 and lives in the neighboring town. David and his wife, Rachel, struggled to have children for about 10 years. It seemed that Rachel was more troubled by this than David.
Kids aren't something you should rush into. It'll happen eventually.
David often brought up the topic of not having children when they visited us. He spoke as if it didn't concern him. He doesn't have to bring it up himself. But if they've been childless for 10 years, maybe people are saying something. Frank and I pretended not to be particularly concerned. As long as David and Rachel were happy together, that was enough for us.
Rachel is always telling me not to drink or stay up late. She's like a mom, always nagging.
Rachel would smile shyly and look down, sitting next to David. I felt that Rachel's wishes were behind her words, even if David didn't realize it. 10 years felt like a long time. The day David and Rachel told us about the pregnancy. When was that? David and Rachel, who used to visit us once a month, suddenly stopped coming, and I felt a bit uneasy. When they visited after a few months, David looked embarrassed, and I thought, something's odd.
Well, Rachel is pregnant. Finally.
Rachel's belly wasn't very big, and she didn't look pregnant yet, being in the stable period. But seeing Rachel gently and lovingly pat her belly with a gentle and kind smile, I couldn't help but cry.
Sharon, what's wrong?
No, it's strange, right? I'm not sad at all. I'm happy. I'm so happy. I'm happy. I repeated it in my mind. I couldn't put it into words, but I was truly glad that Rachel was pregnant. Her expression, gently patting her belly, was the happiest I had ever seen. I have a feeling I'll never forget the look on Rachel's face at that moment. The baby that was born was named Michael. I truly thought the name Michael suited my grandson, who smiled so lovingly like an angel. Since Rachel's family lived far away, she didn't go back to her parents' house and stayed with us for a while. The feeling of holding a baby after so long was so soft that it was scary to hold him. I let out a small scream as I cradled the fragile life and gazed at Michael's expression.
You raised me and Kathy. So why are you so scared to hold him?
Well, it's someone else's child. The thought of accidentally hurting him is scary. I smiled wryly as I used all my nerves to support Michael with both arms. There was a different kind of tension compared to when I raised David and Kathy. Michael, sleeping in my arms, was fragile, delicate, and yet beautiful. Michael grew up quickly. At 4 years old, he loved picture books and would read the ones he borrowed from the library. David would always proudly report this to us.
At this rate, he'll probably become a scholar or something.
I just want him to follow the path he loves. As long as he's happy.
Rachel would watch young Michael with narrowed eyes. I hope this happiness lasts forever, I thought sincerely as I watched her profile. One day, the phone rang at home. Frank had retired and, without any particular hobbies, spent most of his days at home, so he quickly answered the phone when it rang.
Hello.
Frank responded cautiously, wary of scam calls and sales pitches. I was watching TV, a mundane moment in our daily life. As he held the receiver to his ear, Frank stared at my face and continued to look at me without averting his gaze, even when our eyes met. I felt like I couldn't see anything in Frank's eyes. From his vacant eyes, I sensed that something terrible had happened. The call on an ordinary day was to inform us that Rachel and Michael had been in an accident and were taken to the hospital. It happened on their way home from kindergarten.
What's for dinner tonight? Let's draw together at home.
They might have been talking about something like that. I imagined Rachel talking to Michael, who was walking beside her holding hands. Then they approached a crosswalk and, after checking the green light, started to walk. It was all imagination, but it felt so real. A car driven by a dozing driver. The two of them thrown into the air. Rachel instinctively cradling Michael's head at the moment they hit the ground. Frank and I headed to the hospital where they were taken after getting a call from David and sat silently in the waiting room. Images of Rachel and Michael getting hit by a car kept replaying in my mind, and I covered my face over and over again. Why did this have to happen? Eventually, the doctor told us that Rachel had passed away. David was speechless, standing frozen in the sterile hallway. Only Michael survived, and there was a possibility of a severe brain injury. David seemed completely oblivious to the doctor's words. When I held Frank's hand, he too stared blankly into space with his mouth half open. Before the sadness could even set in, the funeral arrangements were underway. After Rachel's funeral, David asked us to take care of Michael.
I'm sorry. Just for a little while. I need some time alone to think about Rachel being gone.
While you're thinking alone, what about Michael's feelings? David was so downcast that I couldn't bring myself to ask. Diagnosed with a severe brain injury, Michael lost his gentle nature and began to act out with violent words and actions. At first, I thought it was the sadness and loneliness from losing Rachel that changed Michael's personality, but that might not have been the case. Despite suffering a brain injury that left him with a traumatic brain injury, none of us, myself, Frank, or David, could understand Michael. Michael would break and throw furniture while shouting, and sometimes he would even hit me. David and Frank would observe Michael from a distance, frowning before finding an excuse to leave the house. My worries continued until Michael, exhausted from his tantrums, fell asleep. During those days, only Kathy, living far away, called me every day to check on me.
I'm sorry, Mom. I'm overseas now, but I'll definitely come by when I get back to the States.
Hearing Kathy's voice slightly eased my mind. I'm at an age where society calls me a senior. Living around the clock with a young, violent grandson was mentally and physically exhausting. The turbulent days with Michael continued as he approached the start of elementary school. At kindergarten, Michael caused trouble with his violent behavior, and I repeatedly apologized. I don't think I've ever apologized so much in my life. At first, everyone offered sympathetic words, but gradually, everyone started avoiding Michael and me. Even the former mom friends of Rachel began to avoid us, deepening our isolation. Although the kindergarten teachers made various accommodations, Michael, who couldn't move as freely as other kids, was always frustrated. When I went to pick him up from kindergarten, Michael was watching an active boy playing on the bars. The handsome boy spun around the bar skillfully, laughing and clapping with his friends.
Grandma, watch me.
Michael eagerly lifted his legs to try and do a flip. It looked like he was just holding onto the bars and lifting his legs without any force. The boy who had been flipping easily started to mimic Michael's efforts. He lightly held the bars, stretched out one leg, and played around. The boy, who had been doing flips so effortlessly, now mocked Michael's movements, whispering and laughing with his friends. Eventually losing interest in Michael, the boys laughed and moved on to other playground equipment.
Grandma, watch me.
Michael, with tears welling up in his eyes, punched me in the stomach. Sometimes Michael's violence is directed at other kids. I told David that it might be better for Michael to attend a special education class in elementary school. But both David and Frank opposed it.
He may have some hysterical moments, but he doesn't need to be in a special education class.
Special education is for kids with disabilities, right? I don't think it's necessary.
A severe brain injury isn't easily noticeable. David and Frank didn't spend much time with Michael and didn't seem to grasp the severity of the situation. I repeatedly explained that Michael's outbursts caused trouble for others and, most importantly, were painful for Michael himself. But they refused to accept it. David seemed to deny that the once lovable Michael was now disabled, closing his eyes to reality. As Michael grew, his violent behavior worsened. Even as bruises increased on my arms and thighs, David and Frank turned a blind eye. I once tried seeking help from social services to address the situation. But when I visited, they told me, "The father needs to come to the office." David didn't understand Michael's disability, and perhaps didn't even know what a severe brain injury was. I received daily calls from the school and apologized to many people. Days went by without anyone I could rely on. Michael was always frustrated, pulling my hair and continuing his violence. I was very tired. So much so that I lost the desire to seek help from anyone. One day, when Michael was in the 4th grade, he seriously injured a younger grade student named Alex at school. I listened to the details from his teacher. Apparently, Michael had pushed Alex while going up the stairs. Other students saw it happen, and they confirmed that Michael was responsible. Even when asked for a reason, Michael couldn't explain, and the teacher was troubled. I rushed to apologize to Alex's family. I rang the doorbell and apologized repeatedly as soon as I saw his parents. Alex had broken a bone.
Why didn't the child and his parents come to apologize?
Alex's parents yelled at me.
It really hurt. I was so scared.
Alex, with tears streaming down his face, blamed me continuously. I kept apologizing over and over again.
Why is a kid like that in a regular class?
Their parting words hit me like a punch, and I felt my chest tighten, stopping my breath for a moment. Back home, I started cooking in the kitchen. I made Michael's favorite stew and chopped the carrots into small pieces to make it easier for him to eat. Michael clumsily held his spoon while eating the finished stew. He dropped the spoon several times, eventually getting angry and throwing it at me. With a mix of emotions that were neither anger nor sadness, I handed Michael a new spoon. I quietly stared at Michael's face. What kind of adult will this child become? Even if he hurts someone, he doesn't seem remorseful. He acts on his emotions and doesn't know how to control his anger. If this continues, Michael might do something truly irreversible. That night, in the quiet bedroom where only the sound of the air purifier could be heard, I looked down at Michael. I could hear his faint breathing. I stared at Michael, sleeping with a peaceful, innocent, and adorable expression. The coldness of the knife in my right hand suddenly made my heart freeze. As I gazed at the sharp blade, the thought of wanting to free Michael from his suffering ran through my mind. I clenched my teeth and tightly gripped the wrist, holding the knife with my other hand. A mix of affection, hatred, sadness, and many other emotions swirled within me, and I no longer knew what I wanted to do. Suppressing my trembling body and erratic breathing, I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, I can't take it anymore. I raised the knife I held with both hands over Michael. This is the only way. I have no other choice. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Hey, what are you doing, Sharon?
Frank suddenly entered the room, looking shocked at the sight of the knife in my hand. I stopped moving and turned to look at Frank. Frank stood in the doorway, staring at me with frightened eyes. My hand trembled, and doubt filled my heart. It was just a few seconds, I think. David appeared behind Frank, his face contorted with fear, and leapt to shield Michael. If I lower the knife now, I'll stab David. David looked at me with a face twisted in terror.
Mom, please stop. I'm begging you.
Michael, now awake, looked at me with wide eyes, unable to understand the situation. He didn't make a sound, just stared at me silently from the gap between David's body. I wondered how Michael saw me at that moment. Under Michael's unusually clear gaze, I came to my senses. I slowly placed the knife on the floor and left the room without saying anything. My body felt very heavy. Why does my body feel so heavy? In the living room, I called the police on my phone. My heart was crushed by despair and regret. I wanted someone to punish me for what I had almost done. If no one stopped me now, I felt like I might repeat the same thing. The responding officer asked, "What's the matter?" I couldn't say anything, just stared at the clock on the wall.
Sharon, hang up the phone.
Frank said with a pained expression. I felt my strength leave me, and I took the phone away from my ear, tears streaming down my face.
It's okay, Sharon. Nothing happened. Isn't that enough?
Tears welled up in my eyes and fell to the floor. Gathering my strength, I put the phone back to my ear while staring at the tears on the floor. I tried to hurt my grandson. I'm so sorry. When I looked up, Frank was standing in front of me, looking like he was about to cry. If you look like that, I wish you had noticed earlier. Frank walked over and hugged me tightly.
We can still fix this. Call the police and tell them it was a mistake.
Frank whispered painfully in my ear. I pushed him away and forced a smile. I didn't need a mirror to know. I was smiling horribly. No, if you and David hadn't come in, I would have. Soon after, several police officers arrived at the house, and I was arrested. While being taken to the police car, I kept my eyes closed the entire time. I remembered Michael's innocent eyes and deeply regretted my actions. Tears started to stream through my closed eyelids as I recalled those pure eyes. At the police station, I was taken to a room where a young female officer questioned me. The questioning continued for several days, and I tried to provide as many details as possible. As I reflected on the weight of my actions, I almost wished to be put in prison. The female officer listened sympathetically and seriously. I found myself struggling to speak.
It's okay. Take your time.
She said kindly. A lawyer, who I hadn't even requested, came to listen to my story with great care. It's okay. I don't mind spending the rest of my life in prison. The lawyer smiled at me, looking slightly troubled.
Don't forget, there are people out there desperately trying to help you right now.
The lawyer advised me. The feelings I had when I tried to hurt Michael were not just a momentary lapse. I felt that if I returned to life with Michael, it would happen again. After spending 3 days in detention center, I was allowed to go home. Kathy was waiting for me in the police station's parking lot. I was surprised that it was Kathy who had come to pick me up, not Frank or David, but I was truly relieved it was her. I was also surprised that Kathy, who was living abroad, had come back, but she rushed over to hug me as soon as she saw me.
Mom, it must have been so hard. It's okay now.
Kathy, what about your job?
Don't worry about that. It's not important.
Kathy's warmth was comforting, and I found myself at a loss for words as my emotions welled up. Without saying anything, Kathy helped me into the passenger seat and drove without mentioning our destination. After driving for a while, a vast lake spread out before us, reflecting the surrounding mountains in its clear blue waters, creating a mystical atmosphere. The road was lined with numerous cherry trees, forming an endless avenue.
That night, I asked Dad and David to keep an eye on you.
What? Kathy adjusted her sunglasses with one hand on the steering wheel. The sun's reflection on the lake was so bright that I stopped looking ahead and gazed at Kathy's profile. Kathy and I had been talking on the phone almost every day. I had spoken with her that night too, but I couldn't remember what we talked about. But I was sure I had complained about my life at that time. Living with Michael had pushed me to my limits. Michael had grown so much that I could no longer manage him alone. If he continued to grow like this, he might become someone irredeemable. Then, might as well just. So, I had confided in Kathy, who was living abroad and unable to do anything.
That day, Mom, you didn't seem like your usual self. You seemed desperate and at a loss.
That night, the night Michael injured Alex, I realized anew how much trouble we were causing others. The sad eyes of Alex, who was injured, and the resentful looks from his parents. No one blamed Michael. Instead, it felt like they blamed me for not raising him properly. It's my fault. Rachel is no longer here. I have to be Michael's mother.
Mom, you're not Michael's mother.
Kathy gripped the steering wheel and stared straight ahead as she declared this. Eventually, the car slowed to a stop at a red light, and Kathy gently placed her hand on mine, which was resting on my lap.
Mom, you're not Michael's parent. You don't have to push yourself so hard.
But I don't know what else to do.
I'm sorry, Mom. I wish you had relied on me more.
Even with her sunglasses on, I could tell Kathy was crying. I couldn't rely on you. I just couldn't. But Kathy, who was supposed to be working abroad, had dropped everything and come to me despite her busy job. That made me incredibly happy. Thank you, Kathy. I murmured, my voice choking with emotion. It didn't matter where the car was headed. My heart was so full that nothing else seemed important. I began to feel sleepy and quietly closed my eyes. I later learned that neither Frank nor David knew I had been taking care of Michael alone.
I thought David was helping out.
I thought Dad was with her.
They had told the police during questioning. Frank and David had avoided facing Michael and left everything to each other. Kathy was furious. After the incident, I started living in an apartment that Kathy arranged for me. A few months after the incident, when I finally met with Frank and David, they tearfully expressed their regrets.
Sharon, I'm really sorry. We put all the burden of Michael on you.
I'm Michael's father, but I was too wrapped up in mourning Rachel. I'm truly sorry.
There was more to their sorrow than just regret. The incident had made the local news. Neighbors were interviewed on TV, and for a while, our home was the center of attention. The school, considering Michael's situation, strongly suggested moving him to a special education class. Despite Frank and David's initial resistance to the idea, they eventually agreed after much persuasion from school officials. At first, Michael was unhappy about being treated differently. But now, he has adjusted and is living more peacefully than before. Frank and David were sternly warned by their employers to pay more attention to their family and were almost forced to leave work on time. Michael wasn't with us at that moment. When I asked about him, David smiled slightly.
Since then, Rachel's parents moved nearby. So, Michael is staying with them.
It's incredibly hard for David and me to take care of Michael. He gets angry and hits us, so Rachel's parents have been a huge help.
They genuinely appreciated Rachel's parents, but I couldn't help but think, if only they had realized this sooner and helped me. As I was lost in these thoughts, Frank and David apologized simultaneously.
We're really sorry.
If you can find it in your heart to forgive us, maybe we can be a family again.
I couldn't listen to the rest. I still didn't have the courage to face Michael. The memory of that night made my hands tremble. His peaceful sleeping face, and the cold touch of the knife, and those innocent eyes peeking through David's arms as he protected Michael. Michael might not understand the significance of what I almost did that night. For a moment, silence enveloped us as everyone forgot to speak. Kathy placed a comforting hand on my shoulder and gently stroked it.
Mom, Dad, and David haven't forgotten everything you've done for this family. Take your time to rest.
Kathy,
Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. What's important is to learn from them and grow, right?
encouraged by Kathy, Frank and David nodded vigorously. Maybe if I had seriously talked about my worries with the whole family from the start, things wouldn't have turned out this way. From now on, we need to talk openly about Michael, about me, about everything, and move forward together.
You'll be okay, Mom.
Kathy's bright smile made me laugh. Considering my situation and Michael's feelings, I was given a suspended sentence. Sometimes I still make meals. When Kathy and David were young, they loved eating my fried chicken. The fried chicken I packed in a container reaches Michael through Kathy, and he devours it with joy.
If I work harder, I can see Grandma again, right?
Now, Michael is undergoing proper rehabilitation under expert guidance to live well despite his physical limitations. He might have been hurt and struggled with little things no one else noticed, like not being able to do the bars as well as other kids or climbing stairs slower than others. Michael is moving forward too. Tomorrow will surely be a better day than today. I believe life is a battle against hardships. No one can avoid disabilities or difficulties. Gaining understanding and cooperation from those around you isn't as hard as it seems. There will always be someone who will support you, no matter what. Even in situations where you want to run away, just having someone by your side to share your worries can be a salvation. After finishing the fried chicken and wiping down the kitchen, I suddenly remembered Michael's smile. If Michael is smiling while eating the fried chicken I made, it makes me happy. Imagining the day we can all live together again, I quietly close my eyes.